Hey there, welcome to episode 37 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at about 2:20 in the afternoon on August 8, 2024. It's been an interesting day. Apropos, that's a better word. It's not ironic. I was watching the two-way live sort of reaction to a press conference held by GOP presidential candidate George. They talked about George Bush during Donald Trump giving a press conference this morning. So I was watching that as part of seemed topical. I've included the mention of two-way in today's discussion. Really more of a monologue. Today's show called Intersections. What could that possibly mean? Well, let's find out. By the way, before you wander too far, FFS is a program about what works, what doesn't, what we could do about it. If you don't know what FFS means, you need to meet more Irish people. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you are able to find the episode description, which contains the show notes. There is a long list of YouTube links. Don't feel you must watch them all, but I will talk about them. And there are three links. There's a collection of YouTube links, so there's a lot more than 2 or 3. I think it's probably about 10. And the two usual shameless self-promotion, there to be found in your episode description of this audio program, wherever you found your audio programs and podcasts and whatnot. So let's begin with the show notes. The summary of today's episode. Intersections are tricky with multiple interactions, multiple parties, multiple states and perspectives. Sometimes they are actual intersections you pass through in a vehicle or maybe on foot or on some wheels of some sort. Sometimes they're a bit more complicated, yet somewhat familiar. Not familiar, similar, but maybe familiar also. So that's what today's Intersections is about. I'm not quite sure if I will make my point in the unregulated but time allotted. I don't want to go too crazy and too long. I think there is this point to be made. I don't know if I will make it. Let's find out. So beginning with our shameless self-promotion, of course, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. If you are interested in the various projects I am working on, you are under no obligation to spend any money. Buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo is a basically free-form profile page, among other things. So it's a little bit more flexible than something like a link tree. Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo is more like an announcement, not quite Twitter, but you post little microblog entry type things. I have not really been using Ko-fi.com as much as I could be. All the things I would want to announce are remaining in the future for the moment. But do keep these two things handy. They're always in the episode descriptions, easy to find. I point to my other programs. I do produce 4 audio programs a week of different types, different topics. There was a time when I would have guests on and we would discuss things. That needs to return, and that's some of the top. It's not really directly part of the topic today, but that's something that is definitely adjacent now with the rest of the normal links. So yeah, do visit those links and don't pay for anything. It's unless you want to. You're always welcome to. Any monies that go to those 2 platforms do, in fact, purchase coffee, which is what powers all of my projects. Two-way is a somewhat recent. They joined YouTube January of 2024. We'll touch on more details later, but it's an interesting idea. It's certainly not new. It is hosted or moderated, I suppose. It was hosted and moderated initially by Mark Halperin, a journalist, and it would seem that their morning show has added on Sean Spicer, and since I'm mentioning Sean Spicer, Tim, of course I closed the window, Tim from, okay, autofill is not as useful as people think it is. Two-way.tv, the morning by Mark Halperin, Sean Spicer, and Tim Hogan. I didn't really know Tim Hogan. Sean Spicer, I don't really care for. Sorry, I was a little back from the microphone there. Uh, we'll get into more detail about that. I've linked to their homepage. The morning meeting has these two co-hosts, and then through the day, if something pops up, and it's kind of an interesting idea just from the fact that they do this, Mark Halperin will create a session and people will chime in on a particular, if there's something topical, and they've leaned almost completely to politics now. There's almost nothing that they're talking about than the upcoming presidential race. That's good or bad, but from an experimental perspective, it's interesting. So they've added the two co-hosts. I think that's already sort of a deviation. But the point is, it's an interesting idea that I will talk about some more. So I've provided a link to it. I've watched several episodes, and as I mentioned, I did just watch the one. So they take this live sort of Zoom chat. I believe you have to sign up to join, so it's not just an open connection. But their focus is on getting opinions from a variety of sources and keeping the discussion professional, calm, productive. Mark Halperin uses the term grace often, so don't embarrass yourself is their basic premise, and so far it's sort of worked. I'm going to say about 95% of the time, it's almost impressive how reserved people can remain. They stay on message or stay on topic. And I use the term stay on message because there do seem to be there's a leaning towards more well-known people or repeat contributors, I suppose. And we're starting to see a little bit of a bifurcation. It'll be interesting to watch. We'll see how it unfolds, but can't be the price. It's free. So I do catch it frequently. I do find use in it, but so I have it on here as a part of an overall narrative that will be the topic of today's show. Strangely enough, I have two Wikipedia page links for a movie called 12 Angry Men. It was based on a teleplay from 1954, which you will read about if you read the 1957 movie Wikipedia page. It's a pretty well done movie. I believe it's number 5 in the IMDb top 250 movies of all time, and deservedly so. It is a very interesting movie, and the next version of it was in 1997 as a theatrical movie. I've never seen a play. I believe there are ongoing plays. It is entirely possible that they switch up the cast, so it is not all men, in however you'd like to interpret that. It's a good story. It's very interesting and somewhat educational. So that's why I've included these here today, because I was pondering this topic last week sometime, so 7-10 days ago or so. I wanted to talk about intersections in both the physical roadway, vehicle crossing the street as a pedestrian, bicycling, etc., but connect that to how people interact on short information versus long-term observation. And then I somehow, YouTube recommended a reaction video to 12 Angry Men, and I've sort of taken to watching some reaction videos to the classics. Like, it was interesting to see reaction videos to The Sixth Sense. I'm not going to spoil it if you've never seen it. Come on. But it was interesting to see that. So reaction videos are interesting. It's interesting to see, in general, people of today reacting to, monetizing, of course, all of this, movies from when I was in high school or, younger even. So to see reactions, first time watching Jaws, very interesting. Very interesting. And what is particularly interesting is that the reaction from people who have very clearly seen modern special effects and CGI, computer-generated imagery. They've seen modern filmmaking. They've seen where things have gone. And then to see such positive reactions to older productions has been interesting in general. So here I have, so let me just really count for a real number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, 11. 11, I can still count. That's nice. 11, perhaps ironically, 11 links to reaction videos to 12 Angry Men. You can be the 12th. How about that? So I don't want to spoil it, which I'll get to in a moment, but if you do choose to watch these or any reaction video to this movie, or just watch the movies, I will recommend that you check out both the 1957 and 1997 editions. The 1957 version is probably generally better. There's just something about black and white. It was probably more rooted in the time, 1957 time frame. It was just a simpler, I don't want to say simpler in a bad way. It was it seemed like it fit into the time period. The black and white version that it is apropos. I think it is part of the production and the cinematography, the blocking. Everybody comments on that, like how well it's shot. Some younger people especially, in their reactions, are like, I've always avoided black and white movies, huh? So kind of interesting. Anyway, do check that out at some point. It will not detract from this topic if you've never seen the movie, but it did seem apropos. I've used that word several times. Try to put a stop to that for now. So let us begin with roadway intersections. And what does this have to do with anything? I am a devout pedestrian. I sold my car, I think it's like 7 or 8 years ago now, mostly because I was never using it. I was traveling for work. I worked for Intel. I was traveling around domestic and international travel all the time. My car sat for 7 months. I figured, do I really need a car? I'll just sell this one. Now, I live in not in North Las Vegas, but I live in the north part of the city of Las Vegas. And only more so, only more and more and more vehicle-related crime. So I'm actually glad I don't have the car if I don't really need it. Countless stories in various, usually on Nextdoor, since the email and update. But having a car in this area is a challenge. Somebody got carjacked the other day. Vehicles are being stolen, obviously being broken into. Things are being stolen from them, vandalized. The catalytic converters are stolen. So seems like a better headache to avoid. But in exchange for that headache, I get to walk. I do walk quite a bit. I do use public transit as well. And I still have a driver's license. I can drive. I've not rented a vehicle recently other than a U-Haul to move some stuff, a van. So when you meet people who know each other and who do not, for moments or minutes, negotiating interactions that may go very wrong happen how many thousands of times per day, maybe even more than that, at intersections. How many times do you come up to an intersection in a car, a bicycle, on foot, or some other mode? Do you know anyone at that intersection? No, probably not. Some of you may be traveling at high speed. Some of you may not be paying attention using your cell phone. Some of you may unintentionally, have to swerve. Like, oh, I need to turn here last minute, and you didn't mean to cause a ruckus, but you may, impact others, either literally or figuratively. So intersections are interesting because they are so critical. They do offer so much potential for things to go awry, for simple acts, again, not paying attention, or excessive speed and changing your mind, or any number of things can go wrong. Not seeing a person in a crosswalk, that's my favorite for obvious reasons. So on the reactions, the response across all of the YouTube recommended reactors was nearly identical, with some... Oh wait, I'm totally in a different section. That's what happens when you don't pay attention to yourself. We'll get to the reactions in a second, but so it's actually topical to what I was thinking. So familiarity with others and with the intersection and its various challenges of visibility, angles, upkeep, and so on can make each a challenge. And sometimes we only pass through this intersection once or twice, maybe frequently, maybe all the time. By the way, fun fact, you know why most car accidents happen within 5 miles of home? Because your car is most frequently 5 miles from home, right? So the places that you travel the most are the places you are most familiar with. It is the places where you are most often found. So of course, that's where you will more likely be hit by someone or hit someone else in a collision or similar. And the reason that I was so eagerly jumping into the next thing is that all of the reactors, even though they were very different people, they all had like nearly identical reactions, which is what you're supposed to have at intersections. You're supposed to come upon an intersection, and because you have driver's license tests in your past, and you've passed them hopefully, and you haven't hit anyone recently, hopefully, and you've not been hit recently, hopefully, you're supposed to come upon an intersection and behave or have the same reaction as everyone else. And that is not always the case. So those outliers are easy to spot because sometimes they hit you. But these people are interacting frequently, multiple times per day, multiple intersections and so on. So the interesting thing, though, is this. Now, even if you're a pedestrian, you're probably walking through an intersection, so you're not hanging out. But what happens when you do hang out at an intersection? What happens if you spend any length of time? Not ideally, you're going to spend all day. You're going to have a camera set up, maybe, or cameras. You're going to do slow motion, stop action, however you want to capture different scenarios of distraction, of visibility obstruction, bad decisions, bad reactions, people not heeding the accepted rules and expectations. So I am almost always expecting, like I watch it happen every time. If I am crossing a street and there are people, so I'm pick any street, pick any direction. So I'm crossing the street. The car that is coming in the same direction as I am walking, who wants to make a left turn, if there's a yellow or blinking yellow, which is the case so often at my nearest intersection that I pass through the most often, the driver will make that turn. They got the yellow light. They don't see any oncoming traffic. They're going to turn. Then they're going to see if anybody's crossing the street. So they, twice in the past 7 days, cars have been excessively fast passing in front of me in the crosswalk. So I'm in the crosswalk. They make an illegal move through the crosswalk, nearly hitting me. So twice, a couple days. This happens all the time. Is it data that shows up in an unsafe intersection evaluation? Probably not. Why not? Because this was 2 incidents over several days. It was one person. It was 2 different cars. It was one moment in a 24-hour day. Probably no videos or no evidence of it, so no data is collected on it. No one got injured. Not an event. So if we only look at data, if we only gather information, if we're only pondering these things, you undersample. You get just a brief moment in time. But what happens if you actually sit and watch the intersection all day? You will begin to collect, like, what happens when the sun is setting? And what happens when that setting sun is perhaps obscuring the vision of the driver? Or, they're not quite as able to see because they're looking into sunlight. And that could happen 2 different times in the day, right? Morning sun, rising sun and setting sun. What happens when there's different traffic flow rates? What happens when there are different incidents on different intersections? When traffic is diverted, or so flow rates change unexpectedly? What happens when school is out? What happens when there are crossing guards? Or what happens when a traffic light timing is a little weird? And speaking of that, there is a different intersection I walk through when the when the pedestrian walk signal comes on. Normally, I want to say it's like 3 seconds per lane. Is that? Maybe I'm making that up. But the light will come on, and it does have a display timer, countdown timer, and it will. And this is, I think it's 6 lanes, 6 lanes of traffic, 3 in each direction. Turn lane, 2 lanes, and it will come up and say 2 seconds. 2, 1, starts blinking, So you better be on your way by the time that light goes. So what happens when that happens? And by the way, this intersection, just like the first one I described, people always make the left turn, then check to see if anyone is in front of them. And occasionally they don't even do that. So I've nearly been hit by vehicles in the crosswalk. I'm crossing legally. Like, I have the light. The signals are in my favor. And I'm almost hit. It hasn't been as frequently, or hasn't been as frequent lately. How about that? But it's amazing because people are not paying attention to that intersection. And figuratively, myself and the driver of that car are in a sort of an intersection. We're intersecting in our use of the space and our desire to get where we're going without being killed or run over. So the intersection itself is a point of intersection of these possibly conflicting aims. And it's interesting to me. The reason I'm including this is because there's very different analysis and awareness that can be made possible if we either pass through an intersection and move on to the next one, which is usually the goal, or if we actually take the time to focus, analyze. You might see patterns in different, I've just described one with a blinking yellow light. A blinking yellow turn light, by the way, should not be blinking yellow. Well, it could be blinking yellow if drivers actually understood this relationship. It shouldn't be blinking yellow when the walk signal for pedestrians is active, right? It should be solid yellow, or it should be red. There's no reason that someone crossing the street should have to wonder if a car is going to be given the right of way to enter the crosswalk and hit them with traffic signals. So if someone were to sit and watch an intersection, as I've described it, they might say, the signaling that we have set up here makes sense unless there is an active walk signal for pedestrians in this crosswalk. Giving someone a yield right of way with a blinking yellow turn signal, left turn arrow, may actually be contributing to the potential bad situation. So you can observe blind spots, elements that could be improved for greater safety. I've just described one of them, but there could be I've seen intersections with trees that are blocking signage, lights that are not timed well, as I've described, and some other things that don't necessarily show up. Why? Because most of the time, the vast majority of the time, people are passing through intersections on the way to the next intersection. They're not passing through an intersection making these observations. So you actually have to take the time, and occasionally you'll see a study, like a traffic safety study, and they'll pick 2, 3, 4, 5 intersections, and they'll watch those intersections. But imagine wherever it is you live, how many intersections are there? And each one has a different story. So intersections are a place of potential chaos most of the time, because you are never completely sure, unless there are really nice rules set out and nice constraints and everybody understands the rules, what exactly is going to happen at that intersection. We could be talking about roadways. We could be talking about conversations and meetings and social networking and all that. Kind of similar problems, and that's where I'm heading with this today. So now the movie, and where I jumped to prematurely earlier. So I've seen the 1957 and 1997 versions of 12 Angry Men. As you might imagine, it is a movie about intersection. It is about people coming together to argue heatedly, hence the angry. I don't want to give away too much of the movie. I noticed when I was watching these reaction videos that none of the people who created their reaction videos had actually done any research on the movie. They didn't check Wikipedia pages or IMDb pages. They were able to see some cover art, probably when they watched it on their favorite streaming service or however they watched it. So they were able to see the cover art and not much else. So they didn't know the nature of the engagement, the environment, and so on. So I will leave that to you to discover. But I will say that 12 people, 12 males in both cases. And again, I think it would be interesting as for a variety of reasons, actually, to see what would happen if the personalities were changed, because in fact, the 12 angry men are I'm not going to say stereotypically male in every case, but they have these sort of personae that they take on. And so you can see like, oh, I've run into that kind of guy before. Oh, this guy. You can do the same with a variety of characters. The play and the movies as they are is fine, and it would be interesting to see them taken in different directions. But the premise is pretty interesting, and the outcome of their angry discussion and debate is important. And so the take home in universally across the board from all of the reactions I've seen, and again, I didn't go hunting them down, so there probably could have been 2 or 3 times as many if I took the time. Reaction videos are a dime a dozen nowadays. Some of them are pretty good, some of them are okay. But I was again fascinated that the reactions were almost identical, and everyone did find the 1957 version of this movie to be excellent, amazing, my new favorite movie. Completely, I'm not going to say unexpected, but interesting, noteworthy. So, but I don't want to spoil the movie. So, some of the in viewing, like during commentary, and the wrap up as well at the end, the conclusions, the points of the movie where people were sort of underscoring, highlighting, pointing something out, making an observation. Okay, I see what happened there. They aligned okay. So again, it was interesting to see younger people watching this older movie and kind of picking up on the same beats, taking the same messages that were being broadcast within it. They were impressed by this deep dive and reasoned debate. So the deep dive, the movie itself is a theatrical production. It is an interesting black and white take with cinematography. Yeah, that is pretty good. It's very interestingly shot. The way it is shot, the setting is all very interesting. So there were comments on that. But the fact that it is a deep dive and a reasoned debate about the thing that they are arguing over is fascinating to watch. And people pointed this out that they slowly but surely work their way through this argument without now I'm not going to say they don't troll and they don't snipe, because they do a little bit of that, but not on the scale that we've grown accustomed to. And of course it's a movie, so it's scripted, and it's also something under 90 minutes, so it wasn't going to be days and weeks and months of nonstop social media cancellation and all the stuff we've come to expect nowadays. But in the context of the story and the setting, it was interesting to see that when there were disagreements, how they were handled, and where little factions formed to kind of say, hey, don't say stuff like that, or other such things. So it was interesting, and people did make those observations as they were watching and in their summaries. So that was anecdotally interesting, and the value of actual debate is demonstrated. So just like my intersection example, when you pass through an intersection in a car, you may encounter people you've never met before, and you may encounter them, hopefully not too closely, for seconds, maybe minutes. If you are stopped at a red light, hopefully you're stopped. You may be parked or paused next to someone, you don't know them, but you're both expecting each other to start moving forward when the light turns green, etc. So there's all sorts of interactions at this intersection. Similarly, the characters in this movie are encountering each other for the period of time of the movie, and they interact with each other having not known each other prior. So maybe it's a stretch, you can decide, but the fact is you will frequently come upon people you don't know, and you will need to interact with them in some way that may have consequences. So the movie does a fine job of illustrating that, and I was unexpectedly reminded of that when that first recommendation came upon me. Thank you, YouTube, I suppose. So the value of actually debating. Now, if you were in an intersection and you were to debate someone about who's supposed to go first, like, hey, I got the right of way, that might be interesting. Nobody's going to take that time. But the fact is, we do a form of that with our what they call car body language, right? So how do you move your car? How do you do your signal lighting, and whether you honk or whether you gesture, or if you can see the other driver, where they're looking, how they're looking at you, and so on. So all this stuff replaces the actual, sort of traditional debate, but it's all a communication protocol that's happening to eventually lead to either successful sharing of the intersection, so everybody gets on their way, or a collision. You never know. And if you've never been in a car accident in an intersection, you're missing out. So now, what is two-way? I've kind of touched on it already. I discovered this recently, I'm going to say about a month ago. So this is August 8th. So I'm going to say sometime in early, mid-July. Yeah, it might be, maybe it's about 3 weeks. Yeah, I'll give it 3 weeks. And it's actually somewhat similar to 12 Angry Men. That is, people come together, in this case on a Zoom call. There is, and by the way, the two-way website, if you visit that website, they have other programming as well. So I'm focusing more on the Zoom sort of live discussion element of their programming. I've not seen their other stuff. It might be good. I don't know. This is not a plug or paid. It's merely a reference to something that seemed appropriate. So people come together. They choose to come in and be a part of the call. They may or may not be selected to be, as Mark Halpern says, brought in to the discussion. So everybody's muted. I believe there are like webinar style controls available on Zoom, so you can force mute everyone. So everybody's muted, and then they are brought into a discussion. The discussion may be with someone similar-minded, similar geography, like, oh, people from Minnesota, oh, people from Florida. Can we have someone from Florida talk to somebody from Delaware, right? So it's interesting to see how he mixes it up. It's all done live. It still has some rough edges, so there's a human element, right? No AI is coming in and selecting. It's not quite a debate, but discussion partners in these little intersections, where he literally. So basically, if you walk through a mini version of this, open the show, start talking about whatever the topic of the moment is, if it's going to be a topic focused, or maybe it's just more general ideology, or what do you think of these topics that have come up over the past couple of days, and how will they unfold, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be a discussion with various flavors, but essentially it's presidential election focused in general, right? So in the morning meeting, it's a little bit different format. So in the afternoon, evenings, Mark Halpern will introduce something going on, and goings on, and then he will begin to bring in. He's got some producers that are helping, but they'll bring in people like, hey, let's start with talking about someone who has been on before, but I really want to get other opinions, and so on. So the people that are selected to interact are selected for a variety of reasons. There may or may not be some bias there. I don't know how easy it is for everyone to be heard, so it's not an ideal platform, but I do find it interesting. So I've watched several episodes, like I said. The morning and the evening Zoom meetups are very different because of the addition of the two co-hosts, Tim Hogan, and who I did not know before, and Sean Spicer, who I had, of course, seen on Saturday Night Live many times. I find Sean Spicer to be a little bit more abrasive, and he does have his own podcast, so he's a little bit yet more abrasive on his own program. The idea, though, with this two-way concept is to have people talk and stay on topic, not attack each other, no ad hominem, no vitriol, try to be reasonable and reasoned, and so on. So it's a challenge. I have not seen anyone blow up at anybody. I've seen a couple of things where you're like, oh, that was kind of cheap. But for the most part, people are adhering to this experiment, and it has been interesting to watch. They're reasonable people, and they give some possibly realistic insights from closer to the ground. As I've said many times across all of my programs, I think bottom up, or people that are really on the ground doing things, are at the very least an interesting can make interesting contributions to a discussion It's real. For example, it's really hard to talk about education of K through 12 if you don't talk to K through 12 students along the way. So the people that are actually, and the teachers, of course, and the parents. So it's interesting that they are inviting people of so many ilks to come and discuss. You'll have someone come on and they'll say something. He usually, Mark Halpern, will normally ask people to say where they're from or where they are, I guess. Where are they voting? And for whom they intend to vote. And occasionally you'll get, a write-in or something, but occasionally as well, he will forget to ask them to do that. They'll begin speaking and you would guess, they're probably going to vote this way or that. And, a minority, but some will surprise. And this is the nice thing about a more transparent observation of these intersections. See how I'm bringing that back in? When you watch these things, you're like, that was unexpected. And it's when you actually take the time to make these observations rather than wanting to get in and get out, right? Let me see what's the Twitter feed? Who has the most likes? Which video has the most views? Who had the best ratings on the whatever cable, this and that. So when you actually take the time to consume these different opinions, there are some interesting things. You can develop a few extra little facets to consider. But unfortunately, there's a downside to this. We're assigning. So if I hear 5 Trump supporters and 5 Harris supporters, and I come away thinking, they're all pretty reasonable and they're all closer than people think. They're actually a little bit closer on this issue than they probably imagine, and so on. I'm giving credibility to those 10 people who are sincere, and they've selected themselves to be on a show. They've been selected to participate in a conversation of some sort, maybe a little mini panel, maybe there's a variety of ways they encourage interaction. So those are good things, right? But it's not necessarily representative of the larger population. In fact, almost certainly is not. So we have to be aware of this undersampling and skewing thanks to selection and people. If the policy is stop on red, go on green, and people follow those rules, you will have fewer collisions. But if you have something like Twitter where it's like, just do whatever you want, you're going to have people running into each other. So I think the rules and the selection, and by the way, the two-way is very new. I think I make a note of it later. They signed up at YouTube in January 2024, so still reasonably new. They only have 14.6 thousand, I think, 14,600 follow or subscribers. The video views, I guess, get in the single-digit thousands so far, but it may catch on. I think they are reaching out on Twitter mostly. If they ask where people have discovered it, it's I follow you on Twitter, Mark. So that may be skewing some things. And there's a lot of, just like anything else, just like the long-term observation, it's important to not make a snap decision. Thank you. Not make a snap decision based on a fraction of data. So long-term observation of something like this will be interesting to see how it turns out. So time, focus, and flexibility. Those are hopefully some of the takeaways from this. Making consequential. Making consequential decisions individually takes time. You should do some research, hopefully. You should reflect on what you know, what you thought you knew, what you convinced yourself of otherwise. That's where some flexibility comes in, to be able to be wrong, and that's why you research. There's too many cases where people are quite certain and they were wrong. A degree of comprehension, right? Hopefully you understand what it is you are reflecting upon. And did I mention time? You need time to do all these things. It is obviously most useful to rely on trustworthy, real, accurate, precise reference materials. But unfortunately, we don't always have the time nor the access to those sorts of materials, so we rely on input and opinion from others. And I've talked about this previously. Others, maybe on this program, but maybe on others as well. I do 4 different shows a week. Yeah, poor me. So who are these others? If you're watching cable news, I think everybody's pretty much aware of the bias in those. If you are taking particular periodicals or subscribing to Substack newsletters, or you're visiting different websites, there's usually a point of view. There's usually an agenda. You can guess what a particular outlet is going to emphasize. And this is unfortunate because journalists are not always biased, but certainly their platforms are for the sake of business. So sometimes a journalist wants to report the facts, just the facts, and the headline is very sensational, and the deck and the lead are very enticing, and you get into the article and they want to, they want readership. You got to pay, somebody has to pay the bills, advertisers. So depending on where you get your influence, you may be well informed or you may be not. So when you make a decision, when it comes to voting or otherwise, so voting is obviously topical, but any sort of decision you make, if it's made based on this opinion of others, you should be questioning their agenda. And it's hard to do that because, once again, time, do we have time? Also, confirmation bias. There's a certain amount of comfort that comes from hearing your ideas parroted by others. I agree with that person. They must be right. If the decision involves multiple people, so this is when things get even more tricky, right? If I'm going to decide what to have for dinner, just me, and I decide to have something healthy or unhealthy, but I checked the Starbucks website to see if their beverages were healthy, and I get all of my daily calories in this Frappuccino. That's good, right? Whatever, right? So, so we're making decisions for ourselves. They may have positive outcomes for us. They may have negative, or however we make our decisions, fingers crossed. But once we involve multiple people, or if the decision you make impacts multiple people, and that's often the case, even something like, how fast do I want to go through this intersection? How do I want to run this red light? It's yellow. It's really old yellow. Do I want to go for it? I'm going to go for it. Okay, now it's red. Oops, I'm going to go for it. And then things can go very south. I've come close a couple times being the person that wasn't running the intersection, because when you see that a couple times, you're like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and wait one more second after the light turns green for me. And more than once, that has paid off in my favor. So when you are, and that would have been someone making a bad decision that affected other people. So there you go. If you are impacting other people, and this is the season for that to be the nonstop conversation, and everything on the news, of course, will be all about this. And not only here, not only the presidential election, there's a ton of stuff going on, and it will all be blamed on the other person. It is only more important to spend more time, which we don't have, and more research, which we may not have access to do, and participate in more discussions, which we may not have time or access or awareness of, to assess different factors and potential decisions. Like, if everybody makes a decision in the wrong direction based on things they thought they heard, you get Brexit, which I think everybody is now generally agreeing was maybe rushed, maybe could have been thought out better, understood better. We may find that I should put a comma there. Sorry, a little note editing. We may find that we should change our mind, right? We may enter into these group discussions or group considerations, or at least a consideration of what a group of people voting in this particular way might have. You may find yourself in a minority, but you may eventually say, oh, maybe I'm in the minority because it's actually not a good idea. Or maybe I'm in the minority and it is a good idea and I need to talk to more people, right? So discussions rather than accusations, for example. And that's what the two-way thing is demonstrating. It's demonstrating at a very small scale of participation for a very large scale of relevance. And so I don't know if that will balance out. So it's very difficult to get a picture of how people are thinking about things so grand with such wide-reaching impact when it's such a small sample and it's a self-select. So only people who are signing up and joining are even in the pool of people who are considered for discussion, right? They don't go randomly select people like a poll would do for some sort of statistical validity. So those are things that are not always apparent to the casual observer, that I am seeing people that are proactively joining this and then being selected, not a representative sample of any population. It seems easier to find others who agree with you, or at least to get along with people once you do find them. They make the discussion easier, the outcome more predictable and expedient. You don't have to argue. You already agree. Isn't that convenient? What could go wrong? This is new, of course, and it's always the other side that is wrong. Being able to do it at scale is new. People could always meet up with, people in their neighborhood and so on. But now you can find people anywhere thanks to social media algorithms and their emphasis on engagement time. So everybody wants to engage people who either agree with them directly or who very loudly disagree with them. That's where you get your adrenaline up and you get angry and you participate more and you yell and you type in all caps and you click on things and then you might reshare things. Look how dumb this guy is. I'm resharing their content for the sake of YouTube's profit, right? So there's all sorts of factors that impact how people discuss things at scale and who they're discussing them with. And that's where we get into one of the most incorrectly used terms ever, the public square. These usually work out better over time. So if you have a public square where you live and you just moved into town and you visit the public square, you are best. Okay, so it's a physical meeting of people. You go to the meetup spot, wherever it is. Maybe it's an amphitheater. Maybe it's a community center. Could be anything. So if your community has a public square, usually you can't get much bigger than that. If you're getting 10, 20, 50, 100 people to show up, that's probably reasonable. In a community that might be, 10,000, 25,000. So if you can get 100 people to show up and talk about things, that might be pretty good. I don't know about statistically pretty good, but at least you will get to know people and they will know people. So you'll actually have something of a 6 degrees of separation, probably fewer, probably more like 2 or 3 to most of the people, if not all, in a community. So over time, the public square may draw people based on the topic of discussion or some particular problem or concern. And if you don't speak to them directly, you'll at least have a line to them through these degrees of separation. There's a sense of community, a word that is often misused, but in this case, it is common interest and common locality, and a rudimentary understanding of what other people are doing, what they're thinking, where they're coming from, and why. As with roadway intersections, if we pass through once, we have no sense at all. We have no notion of nuance or blind spots or the challenges. And, there's a spot of, I've been through intersections where there's gravel or, I can't remember what they used to call it when they're resealing the asphalt. They used to do it in Phoenix all the time. So there'd be little rocks of asphalt and gravel, little surface areas of it. And if you weren't careful and you were making a turn and there was maybe some little corner piece of these rocks that were not tamped down, you might slip on those. Your car might hit the gravel and throw the gravel up everywhere and hit people's windshields and so on. These are things that you learn over time. So if you're new to that sort of intersection where it's the chip sealing, they call that chip sealing, where they just spread a bunch of gravel and asphalt on streets and let the cars tamp it down into the new sealing layer of pavement for the roads. If you don't know what to expect, you may throw a bunch of this chip seal into the person behind you's or near you windshield. And that used to happen all the time. So it's not a good idea. But if you don't know these things, if you're new to it, then you may inflict harm unintentionally. And that's no good. That's not a good way to enter your community. So yeah, it takes time. People will learn. Attempts to call commercial, and that is especially privately owned, and I don't mean publicly traded, I mean they have an owner. They have a rich billionaire who is responsible for things. So attempting to call these types of online platforms the equivalent of a public square is ridiculous. Of course it is. It is almost insulting to entertain the notion that this is an arrangement that is actually legitimate if you consider the difference between knowing the people you're talking to over time, understanding where they're coming from, knowing if they make a reference to, oh yeah, I live over by, oh yeah, I know that area, right? If somebody says that on Twitter, who knows? Who knows if you're talking to a person? Who knows what their agenda is? You may not see them ever in person. You may not know who they are. It may be someone, maybe multiple people driving the account, maybe robotic, automated. So the value proposition for deriving actual useful conversation and decision making and so on, it might be a complete false sense of reality. And that's where you get into the, manipulation of elections and so on. It should be a real concern. But people talk about that on Twitter, I guess, so it's probably not. That two-way has caught on as much as it has quickly is interesting. And so I said they joined January of 2024 on YouTube. I don't know when they formed actually I can tell you. When they bought the domain, so let me tell you that. Who is 2A TV? They bought the domain on, wow. They bought it in February of 2014. I have no idea what it was doing before then, but it was updated on November 8th, 2023. So it's possible that they transferred it or who knows what. But as far as I know, this is kind of a recently evolving thing. The take home, though, is, if I can get back to where I was supposed to be. Okay. The take home is, so they have 14,600 subscribers. The last video they did this morning, I think, had 5,000 views. They have live streams when they do these calls. So I don't know how many people are in attendance for the live stream versus after. My sense is it might be hundreds watching live and then thousands after. It's interesting that they've kind of come on the scene and that people are discovering them and joining in, and that they have this policy of allowing more voices, and they enforce a level of politeness, maybe. And it's not, there is a chat going on. I've never read through the chat. I usually just passively watch. But they do enforce the, don't be mean. It will be interesting to see how well that holds up over time. And it will be interesting to see if people get frustrated by that and go off and, more angry. Maybe they save it up and they spew it out on Twitter or something. It's hard to say. Surely you can link to the discussions and point at someone. You can give an offset and say, this guy was an idiot or something. So they're not insulating themselves completely, but the actual discussions that are happening are interesting. And the fact that this can actually catch on and draw an audience, I think, is somewhat encouraging. It's not, 20 million people, but at the same time, you could never do what they're doing with that sort of participation number, right? So that's where I would question. And so by the way, they're skewing already. I've seen it over the past few weeks. They're skewing towards louder voices, better known individuals, people that have come on more, people that are familiar. They're probably a little bit safer when it comes to certain nuances of topics, that they're not going to explode on something or be inappropriate. So, and then there's also you can get an observation of how an opinion might have changed, or, we know what you said last week. What do you think of this change or new detail or something? So I'm kind of already seeing that already. I'm already seeing that already. But then on the other hand, these are humans that are driving this. It's not an algorithm, so you can expect a sort of rough edge to it. And so we'll see what happens. It's not a lost cause, but it will be interesting to see how this style of platform can tackle over time, over the longer horizon that I'm talking about, when the stakes for a national presidential election are so vast. And not to say that there isn't value in having 20 or 50 people on a Zoom call and a few hundred people watching and chatting, or whatever, however the actual makeup of each show, of each session is, whatever the numbers really are. But the ability to have people chatting, communicating, sharing ideas from a diverse starting points, diverse viewpoints, diverse geographies and cultures and so on, is still valuable. Whether it's skewing each of those, if it's misrepresenting, overrepresenting, perhaps, maybe underrepresenting, that remains to be seen. But exchanging ideas. What do they say? More speech is rarely bad. It's bad speech. That's a problem. But yeah, so by keeping it professional, keeping it graceful. I don't know if I like that word, but not, and again, I think the proactively preventing people from becoming vitriolic or using ad hominem attacks on people, keeping it to the facts. The other thing that's sort of interesting, and I wish they would actually do this more, is that you will have someone refer to quote unquote facts, and someone else will say, well, wait a minute, that's not actually true. And they can kind of do a little bit of a fact check in there. Now, what I don't think is happening is people buying that. They're not really saying, oh, okay, I've changed my mind. I think they kind of put up with it because they're not allowed to yell or tell someone how stupid they are. But who knows? Maybe I'm being overly cynical. But we'll see if this platform, at the scale they're aiming for, with the audience and participation size that is probably, they can have a huge audience, but the participation size, you're simply not going to have 1 million people participating in a useful conversation. So you're not going to be able to touch enough people to get a really honest sense. Now, I'm not talking statistically. I'm speaking about, since these are non-random, statistically you only need thousands to get a sense. But these are self-selected. There's a minimal vetting process about who you want to bring in on a particular topic and so on. So it gets a little bit more complicated. So how many people are going to participate? What values, what ideas, what localities, communities are they actually representative of? That's hard to say, and that could always change. So we could take this for what it is, but we have to not overvalue an undersampling, if that makes sense. So possibilities, the nature of the FFS Talk Audio program is to discuss what we can do about what isn't working when we consider what is working. So in this case, I've certainly talked about local media before. I think the two-way idea would be best suited for local topics. The city of Las Vegas has 580,000-ish people. Clark County around probably close to 2.5 million now, but say 2.3, 2.5 million. So if you're going to have a conversation about something going on, should Clark County be renamed to Las Vegas County? It's a little bit easier to have a town hall or a public square meetup of people who care, of people who have an opinion strongly in either way or kind of moderate, just kind of like, yeah, whatever, You're going to get a collection of those. It would be interesting to have those sorts of conversations at the more local level, not now, Halpern and Two Way can do whatever they like. Of course, I'm not complaining. I think it's a good idea. But individual and collective awareness and decision-making is a good thing. But you kind of have to have a familiarity with the people in the collective, the people that you're weighing things with. And you have to have some idea of how the outcomes from those decisions impact others. So when you think locally, when you discuss and decide locally, when you can see the outcomes locally, hopefully, and this doesn't happen often enough, hopefully you would be able to reflect on, well, here's how we arrived at that decision. That's not going well. And what can we do about it? Let's feed that back in on our next go around. And if you have this public square concept, if you have people who are proactively interested, you enable the discussions across different interest areas, different geographical areas, different stakeholders, but of different, who would never otherwise have reason to discuss, right? They don't know that they are stakeholders in a common interest, perhaps. So if you can enable that, I think doing it at a local level probably will yield more representative or fruitful or both outcomes, and then lead to more fruitful outcomes if there is that iteration and learning process. So yeah, I think a local first approach would scale better. There's an accountability factor that Two Way is going for here. It comes with the live interaction with cameras and makes some sort of legitimate exchange more likely. Compared to something as awful as Nextdoor, which is attempts to make geographically similar people connect with each other. So if you verify that you live in a particular grid, then the nearby grid, so the nearby neighborhoods will be drawn into conversations that are topical to that region. I don't know if that's always valid. It sometimes is. But if you've ever used Nextdoor, you know that you end up devolving rather quickly into name calling or or harumphing. Well, I just wanted to point out this and that, and there's always some. It just evolves. It ends up not being worthwhile. Or Twitter or Facebook, of course. Obviously, we're selecting for people with internet access, a web-enabled camera, and the willingness to share their likeness when we talk about this sort of engagement. So when you have a in-person public square, town hall, community gathering, or if you do it online and you ask people to turn on their cameras, you are, in both cases, you're limiting participation in some way, depending on how people can get around and where their location is or whether they have a computer. There's always going to be some sort of weakness to trying to be completely inclusive. The important part, though, is that people are able to be 1, 2, 3 degrees of separation away, so that perhaps, if fingers are crossed, people who are unable, unwilling, didn't know, couldn't make a particular gathering or meet up in person or Zoom call, do they hear about it? Oh, the Zoom call is recorded. Okay, I can watch it later. Oh, I can participate in the next one. Can you give me a ride to that meetup? I'd be interested in this topic, et cetera, et cetera. So if these types of exchanges become ingrained, I'll even say culturally, you might actually be able to encourage people to proactively participate with their ideas rather than keeping them to themselves. I will inject a little, I didn't write this down, but I have talked about this in a couple of scenarios. A city hackathon. Now, most cities, I know California requires it by law. I don't know if Nevada does, but there will be some sort of a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, a million-year plan or something. And they have to plan, they have to actually commit to a document, a plan for things like land use, for residential, mixed use, commercial, parking lot sizing algorithms, transportation, cars, public transportation, bike lanes, parks and recreation, all sorts of things that make up a city. Like, where are we now? Where do we want to be in 10 years? How are we going to get there, right? So it shouldn't be rocket science, but it kind of is. So I've talked to city planning people about this specifically. I've said, when you do this and then you're moving along through the years, right? You commit to this plan, you're 2 years in, you're like, ooh, those were incorrect assumptions, or those look like they might be in need of some adjustment. Does anyone actually go back and adjust things? Or do you just wait until the end and say, whoopsie? And the look I received was almost like I was suggesting, injuring kittens or something. Like, what are you thinking? That's insane that we would do more work like that. So I think that's a problem. But I think if the people in a city were to be more aware of how the city functions and operates and how these decisions are made and how they are, whether they're examined or not, how they could be part of an iterative process to actually drive improvement in better communities and so on. So if there is a culture of communication at the community level, and I'm using community explicitly as people who are proximal, so people who live near each other. So you might live in a neighborhood or a homeowners association, or an apartment complex or something. You have common interests. You're geographically proximal. You probably see each other. You may not know each other, but you can spot this. Oh, I've seen you around before. If you can develop that sort of interaction, and it isn't purely digital sniping and trolling on Nextdoor, but an actual relationship with the people around you, where actions taken based on decisions made have consequence that is observable and can be fed back into the next decision-making process. So once that becomes real and trustworthy, right? Like, if it's a credible process that people participate in and they say, oh yeah. So I've suggested the hackathon idea as proactively engage with people who live in your city and say, hey, we're going to be doing some planning for this area, this geography, this particular layer, like parking or internet access or whatever it is. We would like public input, and you allow people with ideas to ponder those ideas with their fellow residents, people who live near or even not near, right? People who are familiar, people who have similar ideas, etc. So you have a base of people who are proactively engaged with ideas to bring, share, develop, and you enable them with subject matter experts, any consultants or any city staff, anybody who's in planning or anybody who's in infrastructure for talking about internet or electricity or water or wherever it is. So you combine a real interest from stakeholders, the people that live in the city, with access to experts who understand these things, but who don't spend their time. Now, if I can see an intersection through my window, I can see that I can watch that intersection all day. I may be more familiar with that intersection than the person in streets and traffic who does the traffic study and says, "Oh, that intersection's fine." And I might be saying, "I see someone almost get hit by a car like 3 times a day," but that doesn't show up because they're undersampling the data that's available at that particular intersection. So now you create an intersection. See, I'm overdoing it now. Between the streets and traffic person and the person who can make that observation and legitimately say, you're not collecting enough data because I'm seeing a lot more near miss than you're showing in your numbers. By connecting people that are actually on the ground, stakeholders with a real interest, with people who are not disinterested but don't have the access to the data, they don't have the time to spend, they're not sitting at the intersection or at the where they're not observing what it is at the resolution that people who are really interested are able to. So when you have a problem with something, you're going to take the time to figure it out. You're going to watch, you're going to take pictures, you're going to take videos, you're going to post on social media and complain maybe. But someone who has a 9-to-5 job working for the city staffer, or an agency of some sort, they got 25 things to do. One of them might be some time spent on the thing that you actually care about. So putting those people together in an environment that is very specifically aimed at having them interact, engage, and then evolve an idea into something that emerges into a workable, like, hey, we could try that. That is actually doable, right? These are all possibilities. And I've talked to people in city government about these things, and it's usually, I guess it's scary. I don't know. They're not overly, and they're like, ooh, that does sound like an interesting idea, but, and then it never happens. It is possible to recognize and reflect upon the outcomes of discussions and decisions in a consumable, digestible way, so that the likelihood of an aha moment, or even moments, might increase, with cause and effect becoming a much more common part of the analysis than merely emotion and solipsism. So that is, the more you're interacting with people, especially if they know what they're talking about, and they don't necessarily have to be trained academic experts, but they know the nature of the problem firsthand. They are directly impacted by it. They're directly impacted by a proposed solution, and they might have a different idea. People who are trained, who are educated, who have an academic level of expertise, et cetera, all these people sharing ideas proactively, you may actually begin to realize the cause and effect as it affects others and yourself, what the causes are. How can we get a better solution to this? How can we ponder, discuss, and devise a better solution that doesn't, completely negatively impact the people on that side of the street or whatever it is, right? Rather than considering only my concerns, my solipsism, right? I'm just worried about me, my house, my property, my whatever it is. And I'm making an emotional response. This just makes me angry that they're taking our money in their, whatever. But if you actually look at the impact, the problem space, the solution space, the funding, the resources, if you become more aware of those things and are able to discuss them in meaningful ways, I think more people become educated and aware, and maybe that even through osmosis reaches other people who don't initially take that proactive level of interest and engagement. I will come to a close. We're pretty much at the end, by pointing out an example is CERT. I've talked about CERT, I think, a little bit. The Community Emergency Response Team. It's part of FEMA. It is civilian first responders and training for SAME. The presumption is, in the time of a crisis, an earthquake, a flood, a fire, monsters. The people that are living in a neighborhood, they know their neighborhood, they might know their neighbors, they may be cut off. As I've heard this expression a few times, you don't want to be where the professional first responders are showing up first. That means you're the worst off, right? So you want to be in a position where you got 3 or 4 days before fire, police, ambulance, emergency services, food, Red Cross. Those people are going to show up eventually, but they have to go to the worst places first. So CERT, the notion is you train people who are already living there because they're already there to take some initial steps to, assess the situation, try to find people that might not be able to move. Maybe they got injured, people who are in high risk situations, people that are not ambulatory, maybe people that are require medications or medical devices to live, et cetera, et cetera. So you go as a civilian group. They teach you how to organize a incident command center and what information to collect and best practices to maintain your own safety when you're going through a building trying to find potential, we'll say, survivors, how to triage injured people, how to transport them, basic, very basic first aid, no life saving. That's a different story. It's unfortunate, but 3 or 4 days you cannot start CPR because you're not going to make it, not for 3 or 4 days. So it's an interesting class. The take home is that you end up engaging with people who are similarly proactively interested in this. When the time comes, if it does, those people are going to have to communicate what they have learned to their neighbors, their colleagues who live nearby, the people in their neighborhood, maybe beyond. And they also have to communicate with the professional first responders. So these people become sort of emissaries in crisis. Similar things could happen for people who are proactively interested in a community issue, a neighborhood or a block or a cul-de-sac. Not everybody's going, but you can communicate what you've learned, just like I could tell people if they were curious, like, oh, well, here's what happens if there's a flood, this is going to happen, and that's where the fire station is, and that you would gather over here, and then when they do this, you're going to, you could walk through what's going to happen. I found this invaluable when I had a house fire. My neighbor had no idea and was freaking out, but I had already been through all of this. I knew the firefighters. I knew where they were coming from. We had gone through a CERT drill together. So I knew the fire station was right over there. I knew they're going to come around here. They're going to do this. They're going to cut through everything was something we'd already learned about. So if you can become a more aware and engaged person in your locality, in your smaller group of, a couple hundred people, then if you multiply that, you could actually get some usable level of community engagement when you're talking about, and community, again, geographical proximity. I'm not a fan of overuse of the term community, but if you're able to engage people that actually know what they are seeing, quote unquote, on the ground, but legitimately, if you have an actual representation of what's happening, not statistical maybe, but reasonable, then you at least have a pathway to communicating further. They can perhaps share some more information or get the word out about, hey, we're having a special meeting. All kinds of possibilities if people are more proactively engaged rather than where we find ourselves now. The thing that is not working is passive engagement, believing what we're told, not figuring out for ourselves what is true, what is false, listening to the salacious, listening to the exciting, the things that either make us happy to gloat in others' failures, or the things that make us mad, make us want to be vitriolic and type an angry tweet. So I think a return to healthy communication is in order. And I think it is possible if people will see any sort of value in intersections. Don't forget to visit buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo or ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. No obligation to spend any money, but you can figure out what other programs I'm producing weekly. It's 4 different ones, plus whatever else comes along. I will announce things in those places and others, but you can always check there. And any monies that do flow through there do go towards coffee, which is how I power my projects. Thank you for listening. Take care.